now. Great. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. Before we get started officially, I just want to say that this issue is so very important. I work a fair bit with campuses and higher education institutions and emergency management planners and security technology professionals, and there's a lot of money and resources and time put into these larger mass notifications, emergency situations on campus, and rightfully so. However, I don't think there's enough emphasis or attention to what I believe is a much, much more common and serious issue. It's about violence against women on campus, dating violence, domestic violence, bullying, stalking behavior. That, I believe, happens a lot. I mean, certainly we can watch the news, and in the field that we're in, we study this, we're absorbed in it, and we realize how much it occurs. But, you know, my undergrad and graduate school experience, you know, I never had any shooter incidents, but I've had a lot of cases where a colleague or a friend or a dorm mate, we hear about these horrible incidents of violence against women, and that is happening every day. We got a weekend coming up. It's Friday, and right here in Raleigh, where we got NC State and Peace College, Meredith, you know, there's probably going to be an incident, and it's going to happen here, and it's not going to get reported, and it has to be addressed. So, okay, I'm done. Thank you for listening to my rant. I want to introduce Pat Biles, who could talk a little about the Alliance and introduce our speaker.
Okay. Once again, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. It is the 6th webinar in our series of Halt the Violence. And as you see, we have our website up here. This is primarily a blog site, and you'll see the last blog that I did is an announcement, a very important announcement that I'm excited about. In April of 2012, we are going to be promoting workplace violence awareness for that entire month, and we will culminate on Workers' Memorial Day, which most of you are probably familiar with. So just be looking out for more announcements along those lines, and we invite you to come up with ideas for how you and your companies or universities or whatever it is that you happen to represent may participate in Workplace Violence Awareness Month. Please feel free to go online and make comments to our blog and to visit us on Facebook and Twitter and follow us for that. So today I am very honored to present Dr. Laura Finley. I met her at a meeting a few months ago of the Peace Education Alliance here in South Florida. She is one of the leaders of that group. And I also had the honor to present at one of her, at her Peace In, which she had on the International Peace Day at Barry University. Dr. Finley is an assistant professor of sociology and criminology at Barry University. She's also the author or co-author of 10 books and numerous book chapters and peer-reviewed journal articles. She has extensive experience working in the domestic violence field. She has served as a trainer for a domestic violence agency, and she regularly trains physicians and social service providers about abuse. Additionally, Dr. Finley serves on the board of directors of the UN Women East Florida chapter, and No More Tears, which is a nonprofit in South Florida that provides services to victims of domestic violence, and the Peace and Justice Studies Association. So I'm very happy again and honored to present to you today Dr. Laura Finley.
Thank you very much, Pat, for the nice introduction, and to Johnny for helping arrange this and walking me through this process. I'm going to let everyone who's participating know that while I've done a lot of workshops and trainings on this topic before, I've never done them in webinar format. And so please bear with me if there's any glitches on my end. I'm sure there won't be on the technological end because Johnny's taking care of that. But anything on my end, I take full responsibility for. So I guess with, we only have an hour. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Our focus today is on domestic and dating violence prevention. I've worked a lot in the service provision area. I used to work at one domestic violence agency here in South Florida. I now work with another nonprofit that provides services. And no one is arguing that's not essential. Clearly, most people who participate in an event like this would know that it's really critical we provide services. However, oftentimes those service providers are wanting to do prevention work, but sometimes are constrained from doing so because of funding, because of staff power, because of prioritization of their services over what they see as important but maybe can't quite accommodate. And so that makes it all the more important that those of us involved in colleges and in other community groups help pick that up a little bit and help craft prevention programs. I work at Barry University, as you heard in the introduction, and we've been doing some innovative things at my university, some of which I'm going to showcase today. But I set the PowerPoint up first with just a quick review about the scope and extent of domestic and dating violence. I'm presuming most people who are participating today already know most of these, so we'll go through it pretty quickly. But I think it's important to just quickly review why we're here. Why does this matter? So if we can go ahead to the next slide, we'll take a look at how frequently these problems are happening. Perhaps. There we go. Okay, and if we can, this is obviously a pretty disturbing photo, an ad that I pulled off of Google Images, but kind of gets that there is no reason for abuse. But let's go ahead to the next one, and we'll look at, again, some of these statistics about how frequently abuse happens. Before you can even understand how frequently it happens, we have to get a good working definition. And I've tried to pull this from the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, as you can read here. Personally, I don't think this is a perfect definition, in that I'm not real comfortable with the intimate relationship wording, as you see here, if you're reading that paragraph, only because I think that actually suggests that that's the only type of abuse that can happen. And as many of us know, abuse can happen in different kinds of relationships that maybe aren't sort of stereotypically intimate. In the state of Florida, where I live, actually, our domestic violence statute covers situations if you live in a household as if a family. So you are considered a domestic violence victim if, for instance, you are being abused by your senior citizen father who lives with you, or one of your siblings who's living with you. So that part I take, a little bit of grain of salt with, if you will, but I like this definition, and that it emphasizes some of the key words that most of us are probably familiar with. The idea that battering is a pattern, and that the key of it is power and control. And somebody's using whatever tools they can to obtain and maintain that power and control. So from a prevention perspective, that gives us a little insight where we need to go. How do we help people identify those signs of, or early signs of power and control, so that they can get out of a situation that might become abusive? And even before that, how do we teach young people not to need that kind of power and control in their relationships? So these are kind of some of the things that we can be thinking about and looking at. So if we go on to the next slide, we should take a look again at some of the statistics. And I set this up a little bit to be the global, to down to, the state level, and some, kind of narrowing it down, if you will. Most figures I've seen put it at about 1 in 3 women across the globe at some point will be a victim of domestic violence. I've seen that number put forward by Amnesty International, as well as a number of other groups. The World Health Organization study of 2005 found rates as high as 71% in some parts of like rural Ethiopia, rural Chile. Those are really disturbing numbers. And of course, we all know abuse takes lots of different forms. And outside of the U.S., some of those forms might include honor killings, an estimated 5,000 a year, dowry killings, acid attacks, etc. And so just kind of setting this up to frame things. We're talking about what the United Nations has previously called the world's worst human rights problem. Bigger than genocide, bigger than sort of any of these things that we think of that are horrific. This is impacting more people. All right, so we're going to go on to the next slide, please. All right, and so then there's some national level statistics looking at each year more women will experience more than 2 million injuries, and the estimated 1/4 to 1/3 of U.S. women will be a victim of domestic violence. The National Network to End Domestic Violence does a 24-hour census every year, and again, some people may be familiar with that, where they call out to all the shelters in the country and ask them to track how many calls do they get that day, how many people came in for various services, and then use that data to see in a 24-hour period how many people are seeking help for domestic violence. And a crisis call, according to the 2010 data, was occurred every 41 seconds. So some really disturbing statistics. We also have to take all our statistics with a grain of salt again, because as most of us know, many times our data about domestic and dating violence comes from a law enforcement source, and that presumes that abuse victims call law enforcement, and we know that many do not for complex reasons that probably we won't go into today unless there's some specific questions about those. Data from crisis lines and from domestic violence shelters, of course, give us a different view. So putting them together, what we see here is a huge, huge social problem. We also see, if you've noticed, most of this data is on female victims. But as we all know, it's not just females that are victimized. Males are victims too. Nationally, the figures usually are about 15% of victims each year are males. And so when we're talking about a prevention perspective, we cannot just be focusing on females as would-be victims. We can't just be focusing on males as would-be perpetrators. And we by no means should be focusing exclusively on either gender. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and go on a little bit here. We know also there are particular groups that are vulnerable to abuse. Rates for teenage girls are as high, approximately, as they are for adult victims of domestic violence. What's interesting about that is the data about dating violence shows that there is close to gender parity in who is victimized, meaning boys are almost as likely to be in an abusive relationship as teenagers as are girls. So again, it calls for us to do prevention with all people, regardless of their gender. College women are particularly vulnerable. Statistics, again, show it at about 1/3, and this is a group that's specifically underreported, as do teen victims. There's some data to suggest that less than 5% of dating violence or sexual assault incidents are actually reported on campuses. And so, we've got some problems with our numbers, despite as huge as they may be. And obviously, we all probably know that children are considered the silent victims. And we won't focus a lot on that, although clearly our prevention programming is going to some degree, target children as well. So we'll go ahead and move on. Okay, so this slide is just intended to give us a feel for who is at most risk. Obviously, we know that anyone can be a victim, but these are some things that repeatedly appear in the data. As I mentioned, women at college ages are at great risk. Often asked about racial or ethnic groups, and data is pretty mixed on a lot of different groups, so I can't with confidence say there's many groups that really stand out as more likely to be victimized other than American Indian and Alaska Native. They repeatedly show up in the data, as do immigrants as a whole, but not one particular immigrant group. As I mentioned, men are also victims, and there are similar rates, about 1/3 of abusive relationships in same-sex couples as well. And so, again, I think this helps us understand the phenomena, but also points us in the right direction for how are we going to craft prevention. We need to be reaching out on all of these different elements. So we'll go ahead and go on. And I apologize if I'm moving through this too fast, but I'm just, again, presuming most people kind of know a lot of this stuff, and we want to get into the more prevention focus for today. So clearly, abuse has tremendous impact on those people who've endured it, and this slide is intended to give us a little feel for what happens after you've been a victim of abuse, or often while you're experiencing the abuse. And you can see from even the bottom point that this does impact all of us. It impacts all of us because, our tax dollars help pay for medical services or other mental health services, and we work and live with these people who are suffering from asthma and substance abuse and heart disease. These are our friends. These are our family members. And so it calls on all of us to help be involved in prevention so as to hope nobody endures abuse and certainly prevent these long-term impacts. And sorry I didn't mention this, but I'm a really fast talker, so I hope I'm not leaving anyone behind just by nature of how quickly I speak. And if I am, please flag us, and we'll try to I'll try to go back or speak a little bit less quickly. So moving on from that kind of quickie introduction to the phenomena of dating and domestic violence, we're going to start looking at prevention. And then I pulled out a definition. What does that mean here? As you can see, it's just one definition, but seems to be a good one. It's a systematic process that promotes safe, healthy environments and behaviors, reducing the likelihood of frequency of an incident, injury, or condition occurring. So again, the idea with domestic and dating violence is that we are going to prevent it from ever occurring. That's what true prevention would mean. As we're going to see in the next slide, there are different types of prevention that we can talk about. And so we'll go to that. Primary prevention is what we really ultimately need to be focusing on, and that is intervening before any violence actually occurs, because we have prevented or significantly reduced the risk factors that make it occur. So this, for our purposes, involves things related to examining gender roles, which play a part in dating and domestic violence. It involves examining, for us, bullying behaviors, which we know to be predictive of later involvement in dating and domestic violence, home health, a number of things that we would want to intervene in before any act of dating or domestic violence can occur. Secondary prevention builds on that, involves identifying risk factors and taking actions before the violence occurs, but it's not quite so much at the root, the sort of root social causes, which is where primary prevention lies. And then tertiary prevention involves actually minimizing the impact or the chance that repeated occurrence of the incident. So it's really not so much true prevention as it is trying to prevent future incidents, but dealing with the ones that have already occurred. So the programs that I'm going to be talking about are dealing largely with the primary and secondary function. My experience has been more with sort of the tertiary function historically, but as I've grown in this field, I've come to learn that really what we need to do is work in primary and secondary prevention to make sure these incidents aren't happening in the first place. So let's go ahead and move on. So the goal of primary prevention is to strengthen informal social networks, which might include family, friends, neighbors, community groups, coworkers, religious groups, so such that they can provide a supportive role to folks in advance, again, of any incident of abuse happening. The idea is with those sort of social capital and social bonds, we are then able to protect from not just dating and domestic violence, but other connected or correlated incidents of violence. So it's really, in a lot of senses, about community building, whether that be in the actual neighborhood or community, or whether that be, again, in your school or your church or some other sort of civic or friend-related group. Okay, so we'll move on. So obviously, again, then the big part of prevention is to get communities out, to care about this issue, to mobilize them, to take action, not as much, again, after an incident, although that is certainly still important until we've fully prevented abuse, but in advance so that we can transform the social norms and the social structures. So that might involve getting the community to support, develop, and implement prevention strategies. I'm going to share some examples of some programs that have done this. It involves lots of facets to really, truly mobilize your community. Clearly, there's going to be some education and awareness-raising components. First, I think, at least in my assessment, we need to let people know the full scope and extent of this problem with dating and domestic violence. As most of us probably realize, media covers this and not always terrifically well. They cover high-profile incidents, but maybe they don't always let us know the full scope of the problem. So we might hear about it when a domestic violence homicide or homicide-suicide combo occurs, but we may have no idea as a general public how frequently, on the whole, people in our communities are experiencing abuse. So we have an educational or awareness-raising campaign that needs to go with any community building, because the community can't be mobilized until they realize how serious and how stark this problem is. We also need to build our community, of course, reach out to the multiple stakeholders, because we can't just go to, let's say, our neighborhood condo association and suggest that that's the only people who need to be involved. We need to do some strategic thinking in order to mobilize the community and say who needs to be involved in this community prevention effort. And it likely would include groups like faith leaders in your community. It would include school leaders, college leaders, people involved in other civic and social agencies. And, of course, young people themselves should be involved as well. And, of course, we should work on the strengths, build on the strengths and the expertise of our service providers that are already doing work with victims of domestic violence. As I kind of opened with, many times they very much believe in and want to be doing prevention, and some agencies are able to do it now and have been for the last 10 to 15 years. or many times they're not able to do it as fully as they want without that community support. We definitely need to utilize their expertise. And so the idea, again, is to build this, raise awareness in community and build a community response that then is going to transform our social norms, things around how do you behave in a relationship with anyone, not just your partner, but with your friends and with your coworkers. What laws do we need to change in order to hopefully prevent and better respond to domestic violence? What court processes do we need to change? Are there victim services that aren't working or that aren't even available in a particular community? Community response could look at, is there enough outreach to, for instance, non-English speakers or other groups in the community? How do we reach young people? The community is going to come together and think about, well, what are the social norms that underlie abuse? What are the current structures of support? And where are we lacking? And how do we put all of our thinking together around creating a change that will prevent abuse? So we're going to go to the next slide, please. So this has been occurring in the field of domestic violence. And in fact, to some degree, it kind of started out that way, at least from my read of the history. In the 1970s, the movement was very, very grassroots. And in that sense, it was very much sort of about mobilizing communities to create a system of response. First and foremost, of course, was the safety of largely women, which is who they were talking about at the time. But beyond that, there was very much in the early domestic violence movement a notion of challenging patriarchal norms and the patriarchal systems that were allowing abuse to continue. And so there was very much an advocacy for ending the way police responded, which was not much at the time, and challenging how our courts dealt with domestic violence. And so, again, I think there was this kind of notion of a community response. It was, at that time, overwhelmingly female-led, however, and wasn't really focused so much on dating violence among young people or involving or engaging, to a great degree anyway, men, recognition of same-sex couples, the high risk of immigrants. Some of those things maybe didn't come on fully until quite a bit later because the movement, again, had just began. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, as most of us know, there was a shift kind of in focus. And it really, and this is not obviously 100%, but this is kind of just general trend. So I know there are other things that were happening, but in a more pocketed or ad hoc kind of way. So in the 1980s, we saw the general trend was working through criminal justice and trying to get batters held accountable, changing policing practices, and then secondarily, well, I guess maybe that's not the right word, in addition, providing services for victims. But there became a little less focus on that true community organizing that kind of happened before, and things became a little bit more institutionalized, which is both good and bad. It's good in the sense that now you have more services and they're more standardized and routine, and you can start spreading the word and people can know where to go, and they can start to know the processes for the police and the courts, etc. Drawbacks of that, of course, is when you start to institutionalize, you shift away from that grassroots community building focus, and it starts to almost appear as if the only the only group responsible for dealing with the issue are those players in service agencies and the criminal justice system, as opposed to all of us. And so we're starting to see in the later 90s and 2000s this return to a community organizing perspective. And again, we're going to take a look at a couple of examples of that here in a moment. So we'll go ahead and move on. So the CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, has, since 2002, provided this program they call the Delta Project. And they support 14 state domestic violence coalitions in primary prevention strategies. Obviously, I'm going to give you some links, and you'll have copies of these to explore more fully the CDC's program if you're not familiar with it yourself. But a lot of it is multi-strategy, multi-players, and involves a heavy degree of social norms marketing, which, again, for those who aren't so familiar, really is about letting people know the reality of how often these phenomena are happening. How often is domestic and dating violence happening? Let people have sort of the truth about the situation and letting them know what role they can play. So the CDC is sort of a model CDC's Delta Project, sort of a model prevention program at the primary level. Okay, we'll go ahead and go on. Another kind of community-based response is put forward by the group called Futures Without Violence. It used to be known as the Family Violence Prevention Fund, for those who are familiar with that group. And their website, futureswithoutviolence.org, got tremendous resources, as does the CDC's. But their program is really kind of walks us through those steps I was describing earlier about a community response, a primary prevention programming. And the idea is, again, that it has got to be multifaceted and involve major stakeholders. So as you can see on the slide, it involves a media and event component. It involves identifying leaders, including non-traditional leaders. So for instance, Futures Without Violence has some highly successful coaching men into boys kind of programs, so reaching out into male leaders in your community, providing information about resources locally, but then also advocating for changes in public policy, as well as these correlated community conditions that contribute. And as I mentioned earlier, poverty, overall women's rights, women's access to work, these kinds of things that increase the likelihood of abuse happening in your community. So Futures Without Violence is another place to go for more information about primary prevention and community-based responses. Okay, we'll move on to the next one. Men Can Stop Rape is another group, and again, this is kind of unique because it is so male-led and male-focused. They have several different initiatives that are largely a bystander intervention approach. So this is one way to do prevention work, and it's a pretty popular way. Another program that does this is Mentors in Violence Prevention. Some people are familiar with them as well. But the idea is, let's not go in to reach people and teach them about dating and domestic violence and presume they're going to be victims or reach them as if they might be perpetrators, but let's reach them, appeal to them as potential bystanders, because we know in so many of these situations there are people around who know what's going on, or at least they have a clue, they have signs, or maybe even they overtly see what's happening. They can pick up the messaging that the relationship is unhealthy, and those bystanders, if activated, can then be helpful in preventing abuse from happening. Men Can Stop Rape programs also all focus on what it really means to be a man, and not the sort of stereotypical masculinity, but this positive messaging about being a real man means treating people with health and respect. So we'll just move on, but again, you can Google for more or check the links later. So if we go to the next slide. Another form of prevention is peer education programs. So in order to work within your community, some people need to be educated, which is what we kind of already said. And so one way to do that is have peers educate their peers. Peer education is designed to share information from people of similar ages and demographics. It has been recognized by the CDC as well as the U.S. Department of Education as a promising practice, not just about dating violence, but about actually a number of phenomena. I'll try to keep it focused here on dating and domestic violence. But I did pull out some research on this specific to dating and domestic violence, which you see here below. But the premise is that young people in particular, but all people, are more receptive to information delivered by a peer. If I'm going to have learn something, I might learn it best from somebody who's like me, my age group, who's been through my similar life experiences or is going through them. I may also be more likely to seek support from that person. So if they open the door by talking to me about something, I may be more likely then to say, okay, that's a person who cares, and you know what, they get me. And data does support that, of course. It supports that victims, especially teen victims, are most likely to tell a peer than they are anyone else. What they find is that peer educators are also better suited to know how to share information with their peers. It's that classic, us professors, we think things are great and interesting we're delivering, and the students who are expecting something different don't find it so interesting. And so, the peers know, okay, my colleagues would better like social media delivery, or they'd better like me to do an activity than they would, so it's about the process, but also the product, if you will. They also find that peer education programs not only reach those who are sort of supposed to be the recipient, but they also result in changes for the peer educators themselves. So this young people or older people, if you're looking at a older person's peer education program, themselves gain knowledge, they gain experience, they gain increases in their self-esteem, leadership skills. So it's beneficial for those who are the trainers, if you will, as well as those then receiving information. As far as specific programs on dating and domestic violence, peer education, there's been a number of evaluation studies, and they have found that these programs are effective in improving attitudes towards healthy relationships and increasing help-seeking behaviors among those young people who receive them. So it does seem to, from all the data I was able to find, be a really effective model for as a piece of a community-based primary prevention strategy. So we're going to go ahead and move on. In order to develop sort of a peer education program, the recommendations are that it involve a range of different strategies, and any one program might involve lots of them or might be a little bit more specific, but again, each program could kind of take their own look. I saw examples of programs that involve mostly workshops or more traditional sort of training to theatrical related programs. There's some interesting programs involving athletes as peer educators. The list is endless, and our creativity here can be tapped into to create some really cool things. It can be coordinated in so many different ways. So peer educators can reach their attendees during traditional sort of classes at the college or high school level. They can do it at dorms or at major events. Many times the research shows that they can help, this kind of program, peer education program, can be really useful to get into sort of very tight subcultures, like maybe Greek groups or athlete groups that maybe, a person like a professor couldn't really get into to talk to, but a peer educator who may already be a part of that group can very much reach their colleagues through this. The idea is really coming from Roger's ideas about how we make change. Diffusion of innovation theory, it's not something we'll go into in extensive detail, but the idea is if we reach the early change makers, the people who are real leaders within their subgroup or their subculture, then we can start to get more momentum, and through their status, they will share that information with others. So the idea, again, is maybe if you can get into an athlete group with a peer education program, and so it's a peer on the basketball team or whatever who's part of it, then they can reach some of the key members of that team who will then help disseminate it. So they're what they call early adopters of the messaging. All right, so we'll move on. So let's talk a little bit more about the program I'm familiar with, which is what we're doing at Barry University. It's an example of a peer education program, and it is designed as part of our communities, our Barry communities' primary prevention efforts. I've been with the university, this is my 4th year, and predating me at least several years, and I'm not even sure exactly how far it goes. The university has sponsored some awareness events on dating and domestic violence, some very cool awareness events, but in the last couple of years, we've tried to amp that up and say, you know what, we really need it to be a year-long program, and it really is, this is a community. Barry University itself, on its main campus, is a community that resides within the community of Miami Shores, Florida. And so we need to get more people involved and more people to take a role, and we need multiple ways to deliver this information. So last year, we applied for a grant from the Avon Foundation to create a peer education program. So rather than faculty, staff, and a student committee creating some events, we wanted to, again, develop this peer-led piece of it. We were lucky enough to receive the grant, and so we trained graduate counseling students. There are 6 of them. I had to think for a second because I was the trainer and think about their faces. And we trained them on dating and domestic violence so that they were fully aware of the phenomena. Those people were selected based on their interest in the issue. They were based on diversity, so they involved both males and females, some younger, some older, from different racial and ethnic backgrounds. And they were also selected based on their communication skills, because obviously if you're going to reach your peers in whatever format you choose to, you need to be a good communicator. We have a great group. These are wonderful people, and I helped provide 8 hours of training to them, both on the information about dating and domestic violence. So we went through even more extensively than we started out today. What is happening? How often is it happening? What are the signs, etc. And then also a part of the training was in how do you deliver this information in creative ways. Our mandate to these young people was that they would reach out to their peers at Barry University and even beyond, go to some of the K-12 schools upon request and share that information as a way to do primary prevention. And so we wanted them to have sort of a tool set of creative ways they could share that information. And so We went through some interactive activities. We went through some video clips they could use. We went through some creative ways to share statistics without reading them to people. Just kind of brainstormed and had them practice delivering to us. Okay, you got 15 minutes and you're working with high school kids. What are you going to do to teach them about domestic violence? They really were able to be very creative. We knew that their chances to deliver this information were going to be at least a little bit ad hoc, in that we knew they could be involved in our domestic violence awareness events that we had already scheduled on campus, which largely were in the month of November. We also knew there were a couple other key events on campus that they could play a role in. But beyond that, it was kind of an at request. So what we tried to do was spread the word on campus and off that now we've got this peer education program. If you would like to receive some information about dating and domestic violence, let us know. And then we also asked our peer educators, and this is really key, it's the bottom bullet point here, to reach out to any connections they may have. So if you're part of an existing group, a sorority, a honor society, whatever, reach out and see if you can provide some information to that group. And so, again, it became this really cool kind of snowballing or growing program where our peer educators have spoke to their peers at Berry, they've spoken to local K-12 schools, they've spoken to mentoring groups, and it's just kind of reaching out, again, to all parts of the community. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go on. Some things that we learned, and these are probably largely commonsensical, but just to share them because it's really important to look through our lessons learned. It's really important to check in regularly, especially, in our sense, our peer educators are students, and they have busy schedules themselves, and so we had to schedule in routine check-ins, some of which were in person, and some of which were electronically, like, hey, let's all email each other, and respond by such and such a day, so that we could make sure we stayed aware of how things were going, if there were any adjustments we needed, any refresher training, as well as what was upcoming opportunities for peer education. We did do a refresher training in August. So we originally changed to students in June. We did a refresher in August when they returned to the campus. And we're going to check back in pretty soon just to make sure that there's not any ongoing training or other feedback that needs to happen. We did find scheduling, of course, is a challenge, not so much on scheduling sessions. There's an overwhelming need in our community, we found, for people who want this information. It was more about working within the peer educators' schedules to get them all together when we needed to for training and to get them somebody available for each time we got a request. My recommendation is if anyone is thinking of developing this kind of a program, that there be a point person to receive those kinds of requests and to do the scheduling, because we didn't really designate that very well, and so it kind of came through me, but it kind of came through other people, and so that was maybe something we live and learn on. We really, really wanted to empower them to reach out and schedule their own peer education sessions, and they have done that, but I think there's still some expansion of that can happen, and we're trying to think through how can we make them even more the agents of reaching out to the community. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. One other facet that we're doing at Berry University that's really unique and utilizes our peer educators, but also is part of our bigger community response and community prevention program, is an event called the College Brides Walk. And I've been involved with this since its origin. The first event was last year. The goal of it is to raise awareness, okay, and to correct any misconceptions about who might be a victim, how victims might get involved in an abusive relationship, what abuse is even really about. These things, it's not about anger, it's actually about power and control, and really to inspire people to take action, to change those social norms, and also to take action to assist victims where that is needed as well. And so the event we created with multiple ways for people to participate. It is not a traditional 5K type walk. It's not a fundraiser walk. It is an event that is an awareness raising, and I'm going to speak a little bit more about it in a minute. If we could go on. Okay, so this is the origin of the case that spawned the first Brides Walk, which was not college focused. You see in the lower right-hand picture, that woman's name is Gladys Ricard. She was murdered on September 26, 1999 in New Jersey on her wedding day. She had been in a long-time relationship with a man, Augustine Garcia, prior, and they had broken up just months before she was to wed another man. She was close to 40, and when she broke up with Garcia, who it appears, had been repeatedly abusive to her in mostly controlling and intimidating ways. We're not certain if there was physical and violence involved. So she broke up with him, and pretty quickly thereafter fell in love with this new man and said, I'm getting older, I want to have another baby, let's get married. And so it all happened pretty rapidly. On the 26th September, Augustine Garcia came into the place where she was posed in this beautiful gown, looking lovely, with her family all around her, and he shot her dead. The family, thankfully, no one else was hurt because her brother was able to stop Garcia probably from continuing to shoot anyone there. But Gladys was murdered on her wedding day. Following that murder was all kinds of outcry, and some of it was victim blaming, as we so often see with this issue. And some folks argued that Gladys had been still seeing Garcia despite going to be marrying this other man, and that because she left him sort of not knowing where he stood in their relationship, then she had it coming. This is clearly awful, awful logic. But there was a lot of community outcry about the case, not all of which was good. The woman you see in the left-hand corner got wind of the case. Her name is Josie Ashton. She's also a Dominican immigrant, but didn't know Gladys or her family at all. Josie was appalled, though, that the victim was blamed in any sense on this case because she was murdered. That's a crime committed by somebody. It's not your fault when you get murdered. So she approached the family and asked, is there something I can do to raise awareness? And so she started walking around. She ran a marathon, started doing walks in her own bridal gown, usually wearing a black veil to represent that something bad happened on a day that's supposed to be about love, and carrying signs and tributes to Gladys. So this is the idea behind the First Bride's Walk. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on. And it all sort of is in honor of Gladys and the many, many other people who are murdered from domestic violence every year, approximately 1,300 people in the U.S. Ms. Ashton's idea caught on, and so now every year there are annual events in New York City on September 26th, and in several other cities. Last year the Dominican Republic held a walk, but they've never really reached out to college-age students. They haven't prohibited their participation by any stretch, but they've never really focused on that. Many of them are fundraising events, not all of them. But last year we decided, given the statistics about how often this stuff happens amongst young people, in particular college students, we really need to bring this closer to them. And so Ms. Ashton and I had met, and several others in the community met, and we decided we wanted to have a College Brides Walk. And so we scheduled our first event. It was last February 11th, 2011. We picked that date for a reason, and that is because it was the Friday before Valentine's Day. And we've got our second event, as you see, scheduled for this coming Friday before Valentine's Day. It ended up being a truly collaborative community event in a way that maybe we didn't even envision from the get-go. So we actually had participation in the planning and on the day from 7 different colleges and universities in the areas, Barry plus several others, number of domestic violence service practitioners in the area, as well as some other private individuals who do counseling, legal work with victims, service provision, etc. So we had this truly collaborative effort to create the event, to do it, to implement it, and then ongoing to build it out for future years. And we had planned for it to be an annual event. We also involved our students, our peer educators, as well as other students in the planning process. And then through a course that we offer at Barry University that requires service learning credits, they have to do 10 hours of service learning, we offered them the opportunity to participate in the walk. Not just the walk itself, but in all the outreach leading up to the walk, which I'll speak to, and the entire day's event, which is much bigger than an actual just walking event. So I'm going to go ahead and go on. So there were lots of things to do before the walk, and I'm very hopeful that anyone listening is really interested and wants to either participate in ours on February 10th, or if you're not in this area, post your own, because this was really a fantastic event. It was really, really exciting. But before the walk, we had lots of things to do. One of them was to reach out to get sponsorship. We had to get some money to help support the event. Last year, we didn't get as much as we'd hoped, and frankly, some of us ended up putting in some of our own, but we were committed and we were willing. This year, we've already secured several corporate sponsorships, and so thankfully, some of those things we paid for ourselves this year will be covered. My university, Barry University, was very, very helpful, so they picked up a lot of the cost because there was great support for the event. We developed this outreach program to the K-12 schools. We called it PEER, Peace in Every Relationship. And so we used our peer educators and we trained some other students who are doing the service learning component to go out with us, usually, although occasionally by themselves, and to coordinate educational activities. So with the younger kids, it was more about sort of anti-bullying. They would paint T-shirts from like the Clothesline Project, and through that vehicle, we talk a little bit about healthy relationships and how to treat people. At the upper levels, it was more specific about dating and domestic violence, and they usually did the T-shirts as well. This year, we're involving a fundraising challenge to inspire sororities and fraternities. We didn't do that last year, and the fundraising will not be devoted to paying for the event, but it is going to be devoted to a local service provider. And so our thinking is that that will involve these sororities and fraternities in a different way. It will pull them into the event, but then it will also help raise funds for a local service practitioner. And each participating school university, so there's 7 of us, are going to have kickoff events. And those will be in January or early February. So there are other ways, additional ways for our peer educators and our community to come together to talk about the phenomena. Okay, so we'll go on. That was me down there in my dress and veil. Also before the walk, we reached out to get media coverage. That's one of the beautiful things about these Brides Walk events is that the media really does like them. They're kind of a spectacle. That's the idea. And so we did reach out. Barry helped us do that, Barry University, as well as our other universities. And any personal connections we had, we leveraged. We use social media. We have a website, collegebrideswalk.com, to spread the word and, again, get people there at the event, or if they couldn't participate in the event, to actually get them to, to at least learn information. We selected speakers for an opening. What we wanted to do was not just come and let everybody walk, but let's have survivors share their stories about unique facets of abuse. And all around the room, let's put posters of people who've lost their lives. And on the tables, let's put literature so that everyone who attends or participates in this event in some capacity has a chance to learn about these issues. In the lower right hand, you see one of our speakers. Her name is Marcia Berry-Smith. She's an executive with Bank Atlantic Foundation down here in South Florida. Very high-level executive, and she experienced abuse when she was a young person. She's a very powerful speaker. And we had 4 or 5 different speakers, including the mayor of our community, North Miami. He came, the police chief, several others who had been survivors. And thanks to the person who said I look great in the gown. Appreciate that. And this was really a key piece of this. We had speakers before the walk and again after the walk, although I'm going to talk about that a little bit in a minute. As I said, we had posters of cases so that we could highlight what happened to folks. So we had a poster of a young girl and her boyfriend who were killed by the girl's ex-boyfriend before we had any dating violence law in Florida. The case was actually what prompted the dating violence law. And we, again, a smattering of cases for people involved. We also had to connect with the local police. Our walk was actually 7.5 to 8 miles long. Not everyone would want to do theirs that long, but what we wanted to do is walk from campus on one of the busiest roads in Miami, Biscayne Boulevard, so that we didn't just have it isolated on campus and only a few people saw, but that the whole community saw what was going on. So that required us to get some permitting, which thankfully we were able to do for free, and it required us to have a police presence because we wanted to make sure all the walkers were safe. We ended up with 150 perhaps walkers, 300 or so people in the before and after events. Not everybody chose to actually walk in it. So the police were phenomenal and donated their time to lead us out safely and to follow us up safely on this long, long walk. We also reached out to local businesses. We got some water bottles donated. Some of the local businesses hung up posters for us for support. And then we brought in the area service providers so that they could table at the event. So when before walkers started and after walkers came back, they could learn more how to get involved. They can find out, is there something these agencies need that I can provide, et cetera. Okay, so we'll go on. Okay, so during the actual event, we utilized our students, both from Barry University, but as well as from the participating community colleges, to help set up the inside and the outside. Inside in our facility, we hung all kinds of, like I said, literature posters. Students made peace doves that we hung, little statistic cards, just everything we could think of would provide information. We also had students go outside, and they hung up all the shirts that had been created through the Clothesline Project. So we have day-long fencing along the side of the building that we were coming out of, and it was covered with all these great T-shirts that K-12 students and college students had created. And then we had students go around the campus and using what we call the chalk for peace. So they were writing signs like, come to the Brides Walk, peace in every relationship, all over in chalk. Students students also escorted and prepared the speakers. They heard and learned from the presentations, of course. They helped us check people in. So students were really, truly leading on this day of this event. Okay, we'll go on. Some of the things that happened during an event, people had to decide, of course, whether to walk or not, because, again, there are lots of ways to participate in an event like this. You could just come for the opening and then come back for the closing. Some people did do that. Some people walked a little, and we had a sag wagon that could pick them up if they weren't able to really participate the whole walk. Maybe they overestimated their abilities. We had students also participating at various water stops along the route and in those sag wagons, so they could assist in that. This year, something we're adding is we're going to provide a CEU training for mental health practitioners and social service practitioners on site during the walk. Last year, since I was Barry's key point person, I wasn't able to go out on the actual walk myself because they needed me on site to make sure nothing else was happening there that I needed to take care of. So I stayed back and just kind of hung out with some students and set up a little bit more for the dinner we were hosting afterwards. This year I said, well, while I'm going to be there, maybe I could reach out even further to the community and invite local service providers who need CEUs, continuing education units, and I'll do a training while the walkers are out there. So we've already got several people who have emailed that they want to attend that. So it's another community service that we're providing to educate. We had students help set up the dinner that we did afterwards. Now last year we had some speakers after the event, and they were phenomenal and very moving, but we're not going to do that this year because we found last year that the walkers come back very tired, and they just want to eat and chill out a little bit. So we're going to do all sort of the programming before and not after. And then again, students helped us clean up as well. The young lady you see holding the proclamation, we received that from the mayor of North Miami, Andre Pierre. Her name is Stephanie Wong. She is the daughter of Josie Ashton, who's to her right. And she was involved last year as a high school student, and now she attends Florida International University and is representing that university. She's an amazing girl. And then to the left of her in the red jacket is the university's president, Sister Linda Bevilacqua, who is very, very supportive of it all and opened up with a welcome and greeting. All right, I better move on so we can have some time if there are questions. So after the event, students helped us with compiling evaluations, debriefing, planning for next year, and those who participated in it as part of their service learning had to write a reflection paper summarizing what they did, what they learned from it, and how it connected to class. So again, point being, from the planning all the way through the post-event, we had student involvement as well as this other community piece. Okay, move on. The things we learned from this event, like I said last year, there are sources of funding that we didn't tap into as much last year as we could, and we just have to go make the ask. We've already got some sponsorship from Herc Jones and Northern Sun Bank. We're looking at some possible other sources, and we've applied from a number of grants. None have received yet, but most are outstanding. We don't know yet. There is funding available to support this kind of thing, especially if you tap into everybody in the community's network. We began planning much earlier this year. We started in August of this year, and since we'd already done it once, that helped us get things, kind of on the ball faster. And we've got this really small, connected core of organizers. It can be easy when you talk about community response to get so many people, so many cooks in the stew, if you will, that it's hard to get anything done. Sometimes it's easy to have representation in a bigger crew, but then have a small core who's organizing like an event like this. We definitely learned we needed to have lots of marketing materials out early. We needed to delegate tasks so that we had those service learning students. We had about 100 of them, really well organized, and their roles assigned, and just simply, again, a delegation. And that they all needed to be well trained so they knew what to do and what to expect. All right, so we'll go on. And that concludes this. I wanted to say a couple last words on the more emotional side about that event. It was one of the most amazing things I've ever been part of, and the students who wrote about it in their reflection papers that I had to read said it was life-changing for them. Hearing the speakers participating in something that was so big and involved the community. We had high school and K-12 students that whose school happened to be along the walk route, standing at their fencing, cheering, and this is going to be bigger and better this year. We had, again, approximately 300 people who participated in some way last year. We're expecting more than 500 this year. And we just really encourage anyone who likes this idea at all to develop a peer education program who host their own college brides walk if they can't be part of ours, and to take some of the, hopefully take some of these ideas and build that community response. So the ending slides, you saw some web links both to our website as well as to some of the others that I think are good resources. And I'm happy with our remaining few minutes to take any questions or comments or anything that anybody would want to make.
Well, this has been wonderful. For those of you who've got questions and trying to figure out how, it's in your user tab, the user interface, you'll see something that says questions, and you can enter a question. I'll be glad to read them out. However, also if you send me a note saying you want to be unmuted, if you have a complex question, I can probably try to unmute your phone or microphone as well.
I'm happy to, just more friendly again, I'm happy if anyone is participating and wants more personalized details than we can do in the remaining few minutes about the Bride's Walk or about our peer education model or any of the related phenomena. I'm happy to coordinate with you via email. My email, lfinley, F-I-N-L-E-Y, at mail.berry, B-A-R-R-Y.edu. Send me an email, and I'd be elated to connect with you on a more personal level if that's easier for folks as well.
Thank you. Oh, we got some coming in now. Oh, I'm sorry. There was an earlier question which the person had, and I waited till now. But it's what are the steps a person can take to create community awareness of domestic violence? Well, that's pretty broad. I guess you covered a lot of that, and I said that you would. But is there anything you want to add about steps to create a community awareness about domestic violence?
Right. Yeah. I mean, obviously there's lots of steps that you can take, and they have to be individualized to your community. I mean, you have to think about what will work here. But there's certainly, I would think, at minimum needs to be a media component. We definitely need to pressure media to cover these issues more and cover them better. There needs to be a school component, I think. Reach out to those K-12 schools as well as your colleges to raise awareness there. And there needs to be a component of reaching out to civic and community leaders. I mean, this is pretty vague because obviously it's a big, big question, but I think those pieces are really essential. I also think it's really, really critical to think about who are the non-traditional folks that we don't always think about with dating and domestic violence, but that we really need to pull in. For instance, again, men, athletes, maybe your military, if you're in a community that has a strong sort of military presence, people who potentially are even overrepresented as batterers need to be pulled in so that they can be activated as community leaders. So I think really what needs to happen first is develop, well, what are our key pieces? What all do we need to include in our community response? And then you can start taking step by step, okay, well, how do I make those happen? Do I call a meeting? Is there a way to put an advertisement out? The steps to come, I think, after you think about what you want the group to look like.
Thank you. But let me answer a bunch of these questions regarding slides. Yes, we will PDF them and send them out probably about an hour after this event, and I'll try to work on my video converting as well. Someone did ask about your email address, and do you want to provide that now, please?
Absolutely. It's lfinley, F-I-N-L-E-Y, at mail, M-A-I-L.berry, B-A-R-R-Y.edu. lfinley at mail.berry.edu. And I'm happy to get emails, comments, questions, ways we can collaborate.
Since you've announced it, is that okay if I add this? I have to check it. If it's not on the slides, I'll put it somewhere on the slides, and we PDF it. They'll get it.
That would be fantastic, and that would really have been a good idea, but I didn't think of it. So yeah, we should add it, of course.
No worries. What are some challenges you've seen regarding same-sex domestic violence cases?
Yeah, I mean, it does have some unique challenges because it tends to, gay communities often are closer. And what I mean by that is just it's a more tighter network in those communities. So the risks of, the difficulties in getting somebody help if they need help are a little bit greater, I would say, because the chances are good that their abuser and they know lots of people in the community, and their networks are very similar, and so to get free of it sometimes becomes a little hard to be extricated. I think also historically, so that's kind of more on the service end, but historically I think a lot of our messaging about domestic violence is that it's violence against women. And while certainly that is a statistically large piece of it, I think we need to rethink some of that messaging so that it makes the gay community and the the LGBT community aware that this isn't just women who are victimized, and we're there for you. We're there to reach out to you with marketing materials that are appropriate, containing appropriate pictures and containing appropriate statistics. I'll give it, for instance, and this is meant as no discredit, but one of the community service providers down here, his name is Women in Distress. And I used to work for them. They do good work, but Women in Distress doesn't exactly sound like an inviting title for you to seek help from if you're a man, if you're a same-sex relationship or not. But so I think we need to rethink how do we even share the word about our issues, who do we reach out to, and I think that's at least a starting place anyway. Recently, the group I work with now, No More Tears, has done some reaching out to the gay community here in Fort Lauderdale area, and we created some new brochures with new statistics and some more appropriate pictures, and then actually made an overt effort to meet with community leaders in a gay Democrat group, a gay Republican group, just so they knew we were there and knew that this is an issue we care about. And that was a big step we found.
Great. Actually, I was going to ask this question. The specific question is, do you plan to evaluate changes in attitude and reduction in domestic violence and dating violence? And if I could just add on, this is my selfishness, we're talking about awareness campaigns. And an important part with the public health approach and also the academic involvement is the efficacy, the effectiveness of these things. Like, what's the measurement tool? And this is my personal add-on question. Has the evaluation of it interrupted the actual production or delivery of the program?
No, I think this is an issue we all struggle with. Is when you're doing awareness and raising events or activities, how do you best evaluate whether it has resulted in changes in knowledge, but beyond that, has it resulted in any reduction of incidents? That's a really tricky thing to do. The change in knowledge people tend to do with these pre and post tests. That's probably not the best way, but it's a way to do it. But how do you truly measure if your awareness campaign, let's say the College Pride Walk, resulted in fewer instances of domestic violence? I don't know that we have a good handle on how to do that. And so we're still trying to think through that locally. We're trying to think of, we can evaluate people's satisfaction. We can evaluate a little bit about what they learned through their self-reports, through reflective papers and things. But how do we truly measure whether we've had a longer impact? I think we need more work, in all honesty. It might be that when you do awareness-raising events, you see a spike in reported incidents because now more people are aware of where to report or recognize the signs. So you might actually not even see an initial reduction. And so, I'm just going to admit readily that I think as a field we need more work on how best to evaluate the success of our programs beyond lots of people attended and seemed moved by it. That's a great first step, in all honesty, but much more needed. And we're still thinking through that for our particular program.
Sure. Just to let you know, there's a related question about how do you measure prevention change in attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors as a result of someone participating in this type of event. And I think there might be a difference between people who are actively involved, participating in the event, and those who witness it or see it. It seems like certainly a different level of interest in the subject.
Absolutely. And one way, and this is not a complete answer to that question by any stretch, but one way that I think is a measure that maybe we don't consider as much as we should, and that is people, after participating in an event like this, people getting involved locally in potentially service provision or volunteering, donating, these things. Because to me, that is a bit of a measure of the impact of your activity. Not only did they hear you, or they heard the speakers or whatever, but they took it another level and said, I will do something about this. And so
right.
That's one thing we're looking at is, after the Brides Walk, talking to all the tablers and all the participants there, did any of the people from the walk come to you and volunteer? Did they donate to you? I mean, we won't be able to 100% perhaps track some of those things, but if we can a little bit, it gets a little bit, I think it's to inspire them to take action. To me, that's a pretty good start of a measure.
Someone's putting in the comment, very important, and it's the truth that men can stop rape. I agree with that. We need more men helping to prevent violence. If I could, and this is me endorsing, supporting, but two great guys are Jackson Katz, and that's K-A-T-Z, I believe, and Russ Funk, F-U-N-K. Two colleagues I had to work with and doing a lot of great work, and I'm just promoting their work as well, so look them up too.
Absolutely. I would say those names exactly. And Paul Kibble also done some really interesting things around activating men to end abuse and reaching out to young boys. And that's so important.
Well, this is a little off topic, but I think someone would love to know about your experience training physicians about domestic and dating violence.
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to answer. When I first worked several years ago at a domestic violence agency is when I began doing that. And then we had got the call at the agency that local hospitals wanted some training for their physicians. Florida actually mandates that training. Not every state does that, but Florida requires physicians to attend continuing medical education. It keeps changing every year of what the requirement actually is, but some years it's every 2 years, sometimes the legislature changes it every 6 or whatever. But anyway, point being they have to attend this training. So we got the call asking if somebody would do it. One of my colleagues had previously done it before I got the job there, and she said, be careful, physicians can be a rough audience. And I said, all right, but it sounds important and I'll do it. And I've always had really good experience with it. So because I started doing it, and I guess it's okay. I don't know. They must have liked it to some degree. I keep getting repeated calls. So even though I left that agency, they kept calling me as an individual to come and do it, not as a representative of the agency. So I've trained physicians at our local hospitals or through some local medical bodies now for the last 6 years. And we do a lot like what we started this training with. It's kind of about the scope and extent of the problem, key risk groups, what do the perpetrators like, or why do they do it? What are the warning signs, both physical and behavioral? What might a physician find in an examination system? What are some of those more overt physical injuries they might find? And then most specifically, they're interested in what are their reporting requirements. So in the state of Florida, physicians are not mandatory reporters of domestic violence. They are in some states. They are not here. So we go through that pretty extensively. And then, we go through what would be your protocol if abuse is identified or disclosed. What should you do next? And, what are your local service options? I've found it to be really interesting to do. The impact, I don't know personally because I don't personally have a role as an outside consultant in evaluating those sessions. But I know the hospitals who invite me do evaluate those. And I've seen, though, some research studies that say that the states that require this mandatory training, be it in person or online, do find an increased incidence of doctors identifying abuse and thus putting people on the path to getting help. So it does seem to be, education for physicians as a whole does seem to be an effective tactic. I just couldn't speak to whether I've been particularly impactful. I would like to think yes, but it's pretty interesting to do, and they usually receive it quite well.
Well, that sounds like it's on the topic on itself, and if you ever, wanted to, we could always bring back this subject of
a good idea
to the medical field, because that's a big issue. Hey, I want to respect everyone's time. I believe Ms. Pat Biles wanted to say a few things about your work in prevention.
Cool. Okay. First of all, Dr. Finley, I really want to thank you for coming to us with this very inspiring and innovative approach to preventing domestic violence, and I hope that others, the listeners, will be inspired to go out in their communities and participate in some of these same types of activities. The Walk of the Bride sounds like something that people might really mobilize around doing. This community mobilization approach is very dear to my heart because I also have a sociology background. So in listening to you, it was just, so exciting to hear you talk about the community, because I believe that many times we get so focused on things like security and hardening the target, the traditional kinds of approaches to workplace violence, that we don't think about the fact that, perhaps we may begin to kind of start thinking outside of the box, looking at preventing even workplace violence through aligned with community organizations and institutions. And that thinking on my part is what led me to create the Alliance Against Workplace Violence, and with the intention of reaching out beyond the workplace. So I truly thank you for coming on, and we'd love to have you come back again and talk about, the medical aspect as well as talking about domestic violence as it affects the workplace.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Pat and to Johnny, for inviting me and helping me walk through making this happen. I do really hope that people who are participating found some useful information and then maybe were inspired to think of something in a different way. This has been a treat for me to actually do this, so I'm excited.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to respect everyone's time. God, I'm going to stop the recording soon, and in about an hour, hopefully you'll get the link for the handouts and the recording. And thank you.
All right. Thank you again, everyone. And please do follow up with me, Dr. Finley. You're going to get Johnny. Thankfully, is going to add my email address on those materials so you can more easily get it. Please follow up with me if there's anything I can answer, or we can hopefully even collaborate to do greater prevention, not just in South Florida, but beyond.